The crunch of gravel under the tires signaled our arrival home. Hank and I had just returned from a blissful week-long anniversary trip, and I was eager to settle back into our peaceful suburban life in Ohio. As we stepped out of the car, a strange noise from inside the house made me pause. "Hank, did you hear that? Maybe there's someone in the house," I asked, my voice laced with anxiety. Hank dismissed my concern with a reassuring smile. "It's all right, sweetheart. Let me check it out." He strode towards the front door, keys jingling in his hand. I followed closely behind, my heart pounding in my chest. As we entered the living room, I was initially relieved to find no intruders. However, that relief quickly turned to shock as I took in the scene before me. There, lounging on our couch, was Hank's mother, Marjorie, and his sister, Belinda. They looked up at us with an air of entitlement, as if they had every right to be there. "What took you so long? We've been waiting," Marjorie commanded, her voice sharp and demanding. I stood frozen, my mind struggling to process the invasion of our home. Hank, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He greeted his mother and sister warmly, as if their unexpected presence was a pleasant surprise. As I peered around the cluttered living room, taking in the suitcases and personal belongings strewn about, a sinking feeling settled in the pit of my stomach. It was clear that Marjorie and Belinda had no intention of leaving any time soon. "Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Belinda waved her hand dismissively. "We're family, Elena. We don't need an invitation." I bristled at her casual disregard for our privacy. Hank, sensing my discomfort, placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's okay, honey. They're just here for a little visit." But as I looked into Marjorie's calculating eyes and Belinda's smug expression, I knew this was more than a simple visit. They had come to stake their claim on our lives, and I felt powerless to stop them. Over the next few hours, I watched helplessly as Marjorie and Belinda made themselves at home. They rearranged furniture, critiqued my housekeeping, and demanded to be waited on hand and foot. Hank, ever the dutiful son and brother, catered to their every whim, leaving me to bear the brunt of their constant demands and criticisms. As the day wore on, the weight of their presence grew heavier. I retreated to the kitchen, seeking solace in the familiar task of preparing dinner. But even there, I couldn't escape Marjorie's watchful gaze. "You need to start cooking proper meals. Fast food won't do for us," she declared, her tone dripping with disapproval. I bit back a retort, knowing that arguing would only make matters worse. Hank, who had joined us in the kitchen, remained silent, his loyalty clearly lying with his mother. That night, as I lay in bed next to Hank, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled over me. The peaceful life we had built together felt like it was slipping away, replaced by a suffocating sense of intrusion and betrayal. I closed my eyes, trying to will away the tears that threatened to fall. I knew I had to find a way to reclaim my home and my life, but with Hank's unwavering support for his family, I feared I would have to face this battle alone. As I drifted off into a restless sleep, one thought echoed in my mind. How had my once happy marriage come to this? The morning sun streamed through the curtains, casting a warm glow on the kitchen table. I sat there, nursing a cup of coffee, trying to find a moment of peace before the day's chaos began. The sound of footsteps approaching made me tense. "Good morning, Elena," Marjorie said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "I see you're up early. I hope you're planning on making a proper breakfast for us." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "Of course, Marjorie. What would you like?" She waved her hand dismissively. "Something hearty. None of that prepackaged nonsense. You need to start cooking proper meals. Fast food won't do for us." I bit back a retort, knowing that arguing would only make matters worse. As I began preparing breakfast, Belinda sauntered into the kitchen, her eyes scanning the room critically. "I don't believe in boundaries between family members," she declared, picking up a framed photo of Hank and me from our anniversary trip. "You don't mind if I look around, do you?" Before I could respond, she was already rummaging through the drawers and cabinets, invading every corner of my kitchen. I felt my frustration mounting, but Hank's entrance into the room stopped me from speaking up. "Smells great, honey," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "Mom, Belinda, I hope you slept well." As Hank engaged in pleasant conversation with his mother and sister, I felt increasingly isolated. It was as if I was a stranger in my own home, my opinions and feelings disregarded at every turn. Later that day, I sought solace at the community center, where I volunteered. As I sorted through donated clothing, my friend Claire noticed my distress. "Elena, what's wrong?" she asked, her brow furrowed with concern. I poured out my heart to her, sharing the frustrations and helplessness I felt with Marjorie and Belinda's constant intrusions. Claire listened patiently, offering a sympathetic ear. "I know it's tough, but try to be patient," she advised. "They're family, after all. Maybe things will get better with time." I nodded, appreciating her support, but deep down, I knew that patience alone wouldn't solve my problems. I needed to find a way to assert myself and reclaim my life. When I returned home that evening, I found Marjorie and Belinda lounging in the living room, watching television. They barely acknowledged my presence as I walked in. "Dinner will be ready in an hour," I announced, trying to keep my voice steady. Marjorie sniffed. "An hour? In my day, dinner was always on the table by 6 o'clock sharp." I retreated to the kitchen, my heart heavy with the weight of their constant criticism. As I chopped vegetables and stirred pots, I couldn't help but wonder how much longer I could endure this suffocating atmosphere. Hank joined me in the kitchen, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I leaned into his embrace, craving his support. "It's just a lot, having your mother and sister here all the time." He sighed. "I know it's an adjustment, but they're family. We have to make it work." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. But as I watched Hank leave the kitchen to join his mother and sister, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was fighting a losing battle. That night, as I lay in bed, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing with thoughts of how to reclaim my home and my life. I knew that something had to change, but with Hank's unwavering loyalty to his family, I feared that I would have to face this challenge alone. I closed my eyes, determined to find the strength within myself to stand up for what I deserved. No matter how difficult the path ahead might be, I knew I had to fight for my happiness and my peace of mind. Days turned into weeks, and Marjorie and Belinda's presence in our home became increasingly suffocating. I found myself constantly walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate their every need and whim to avoid their scathing criticism. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry in the bedroom, I heard a commotion coming from the living room. I rushed out to find Belinda standing over my favorite quilt, a large coffee stain spreading across the delicate fabric. "Oh, Elena, I'm so sorry," she said, her tone insincere. "I accidentally spilled my coffee. But it's just a quilt, right? You're overreacting. It's not a big deal." I felt my blood boil as I gently picked up the quilt, assessing the damage. This quilt had been a gift from my grandmother, a cherished family heirloom. Belinda's casual dismissal of its importance cut me to the core. As I carried the quilt to the kitchen sink, trying to salvage it, I noticed that the drawers and cabinets had been rummaged through. My personal belongings were strewn about, as if someone had been snooping. I confronted Belinda, my voice shaking with anger. "Have you been going through my things?" She shrugged, a smirk playing on her lips. "I was just looking for a coaster. You really should keep your house more organized, Elena." I felt my frustration reaching a boiling point. I had tolerated their intrusions and disrespect for too long. It was time to take a stand. That evening, as Hank and I prepared for bed, I finally found the courage to speak up. "Hank, I can't live like this anymore. Your mother and sister are invading every part of our life. They have to leave." Hank's eyes narrowed, his voice cold. "They're family, Elena. If you can't handle that, maybe you're the one who should go." His words hit me like a punch to the gut. I had always known that Hank prioritized his mother and sister's needs above mine, but to hear him say it so bluntly shattered my heart. I lay awake that night, tears streaming down my face as I realized the gravity of the situation. My own husband had chosen his toxic family over me, leaving me to face this battle alone. The next morning, I found Marjorie in the kitchen, criticizing my cooking skills as usual. "Really, Elena, I don't know how you manage to keep a husband with these subpar meals." Something inside me snapped. I slammed the spatula down on the counter, my voice trembling with rage. "Enough, Marjorie. I have had enough of your constant belittling and disrespect. This is my home, and I deserve to be treated with kindness and dignity." Marjorie's eyes widened in shock, unused to being challenged. How dare you speak to me like that? I am the matriarch of this family, and you will show me the respect I deserve. I stood my ground, my voice growing stronger. Respect is earned, Marjorie, and you have done nothing to earn mine. You have invaded my home, criticized my every move, and turned my husband against me. I won't stand for it any longer. Hank entered the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. What's going on here? I turned to him, my eyes blazing with determination. I'm done, Hank. I can't live like this anymore. If you can't stand up for me, for our marriage, then I have to do it myself. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving a stunned Hank and a fuming Marjorie behind. I knew that this was just the beginning of a long and difficult journey, but I also knew that I had to fight for my own happiness and peace of mind. As I packed a bag, tears streaming down my face, I felt a sense of both sorrow and liberation. I was leaving behind the life I had built with Hank, but I was also taking the first step towards reclaiming my identity and my self-worth. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew that I had to be strong, I had to be brave, and most importantly, I had to be true to myself. With a heavy heart and a small suitcase in hand, I arrived at my sister's home in a nearby town. Claire, my lifelong friend and confidante, greeted me at the door with open arms and a sympathetic smile. "Oh, Elena," she said, pulling me into a tight embrace. "I'm so sorry you're going through this. You deserve so much better." As we settled into her cozy living room, I poured out my heart to Claire, sharing the pain and betrayal I had endured at the hands of Hank and his family. She listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. "You deserve respect, not this torment," Claire said, her voice firm with conviction. "You've given so much to your marriage, to Hank. It's time to focus on yourself and your own happiness." Her words struck a chord deep within me. I had spent so many years putting Hank's needs before my own, sacrificing my dreams and desires to be the perfect wife. But where had that gotten me? Alone, in my sister's guest room while my husband sided with his toxic mother and sister. As the days passed, I found myself reflecting on the early years of my marriage to Hank. We had been so in love, so full of hope and promise. I remembered the way he used to look at me, his eyes filled with adoration and respect. But somewhere along the way, things had changed. Hank's loyalty had shifted, his priorities rearranged. I realized now that I had been slowly losing myself, piece by piece, in an effort to maintain the illusion of a happy marriage. One evening, as Claire and I sat on the porch sipping tea, I confided in her about my fears for the future. "I don't know how to do this, Claire. I've been with Hank for so long. How do I start over?" She reached out and squeezed my hand, her eyes filled with understanding. "One day at a time, Elena. You're stronger than you know, and you have me and your sister and so many others who love and support you." Her words gave me the courage I needed to take the next steps. I began to plan for my new life, searching for an apartment and reaching out to old friends for support. But even as I took these steps towards independence, my heart ached for the life I had left behind. I found myself reminiscing about the happy moments with Hank, the laughter and love we had shared. Late one night, as I lay awake in bed, my phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Hank. "I miss you," it read. "Please come home." For a moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he had finally seen the error of his ways. Maybe he was ready to stand up for our marriage. But as quickly as the hope had come, it was extinguished by the memory of his cold words, his unwavering loyalty to his mother and sister. I knew that going back would only lead to more pain, more heartbreak. With a heavy sigh, I typed out a response. "I'm sorry, Hank, but I can't live like that anymore. I need to do what's best for me." Hitting send, I felt a mixture of sadness and relief wash over me. I knew that the road ahead would be difficult, that there would be moments of doubt and loneliness. But I also knew that I was taking the first steps towards reclaiming my life, my identity. I had spent so long living for others, putting their needs before my own. It was time to focus on my own happiness, my own dreams. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. I knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but I also knew that I had the strength and resilience to weather any storm. And with the support of my loved ones, I knew that I could build a new life for myself, one filled with joy, purpose, and the respect I deserved. Weeks turned into months as I settled into my new life in a small apartment across town. The space was modest, but it was mine. A sanctuary free from the constant criticism and intrusion that had plagued me in my former home. I threw myself into decorating the apartment, choosing colors and furnishings that brought me joy. It was a small act of reclaiming my identity, of creating a space that reflected who I was and what I valued. But even as I found solace in my new surroundings, the ghosts of my past lingered. Memories of my life with Hank, both good and bad, seemed to lurk around every corner. One evening, as I was unpacking a box of old photographs, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen, my heart skipping a beat when I saw Hank's name. "Hello?" I answered tentatively. "Elena." Hank's voice was strained. "Mom and Belinda say they miss you. You need to apologize and come back." I felt a surge of anger at his words. After everything I had endured, he still couldn't see the pain his family had caused me. "I'm not coming back, Hank," I said firmly. "I deserve better than the way they treated me, the way you allowed them to treat me." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I don't know what you want me to say, Elena. They're my family." "And I was your wife," I countered, my voice cracking with emotion, "but that didn't seem to matter when they were making my life a living hell." Hank sighed heavily. "I'm sorry, Elena. I really am, but I can't change who they are." I closed my eyes, realizing that this was the closure I needed. Hank would never stand up for me, never prioritize our marriage over his toxic family dynamics. "Goodbye, Hank," I said softly, ending the call before he could respond. In the days that followed, I threw myself into my new life with renewed determination. I volunteered at the community center, finding fulfillment in helping others navigate their own challenges. But just as I was beginning to find my footing, I received a devastating blow. A thick envelope arrived in the mail, bearing the return address of Hank's lawyer. With trembling hands, I opened it to find divorce papers, cold and impersonal in their legal jargon. I knew our separation had been leading to this moment, but seeing it in black and white still took my breath away. Tears blurred my vision as I signed the papers, officially ending the marriage I had once believed would last a lifetime. As I struggled to come to terms with this new reality, I received another shock. Claire called me one evening, her voice tight with concern. "Elena, I hate to be the one to tell you this," she began hesitantly, "but I saw Hank out with another woman today. They looked close." I felt as though I had been punched in the gut. The ink was barely dry on our divorce papers, and Hank had already moved on. In the days that followed, I learned more about Hank's new girlfriend, Clara. She was younger than me, in her early 50s, with a successful career and a confident air about her. I couldn't help but compare myself to her, feeling the sting of inadequacy. Had I been so easily replaced? Was our decades-long marriage so meaningless to Hank? But even as I grappled with the pain of Hank's betrayal, I refused to let it break me. I had come too far, fought too hard for my independence to let this setback derail me. With a renewed sense of determination, I focused on my own healing and growth. I knew that the road ahead would be challenging, but I also knew that I had the strength to weather any storm. I was no longer the woman who had allowed herself to be diminished and disrespected. I was Elena, a survivor, a fighter, and a woman who knew her own worth, and I would never let anyone take that away from me again. The annual neighborhood block party was in full swing, the air filled with the aroma of barbecue and the laughter of children playing. I had debated whether to attend, knowing that Hank and his family would likely be there, but Claire had convinced me that I couldn't hide away forever. As I navigated the crowded street, I spotted Marjorie and Belinda huddled together, their eyes narrowing as they caught sight of me. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for the inevitable confrontation. Well, look who decided to show up," Marjorie sneered as I approached. "I'm surprised you had the nerve to come, after the way you abandoned your family." I felt my cheeks flush with anger, but I refused to let her see how much her words stung. "I didn't abandon anyone, Marjorie. I left a toxic situation that was destroying me," Belinda scoffed. "You're just selfish, Elena. You couldn't handle a little bit of family drama, so you ran away like a coward." I opened my mouth to respond, but before I could, a familiar figure appeared at Marjorie's side. It was Clara, Hank's new girlfriend, her arm linked possessively through his. It's no wonder Hank found someone new, Marjorie said, her voice dripping with disdain. You're a quitter, Elena. You didn't have the strength to make your marriage work. I felt as though I had been slapped. The sight of Clara standing there, a smug smile on her face, was like salt in an open wound. But as I stood there, facing the people who had caused me so much pain, something inside me snapped. I was done being a victim, done letting them control the narrative of my life. I squared my shoulders, looking Marjorie directly in the eye. You want to talk about family values, Marjorie? About loyalty and commitment? Then let's talk about what you did to your own sister. Marjorie's face paled, her eyes widening in shock. I don't know what you're talking about, she sputtered. But I could see the fear in her eyes, the realization that her carefully crafted facade was about to crumble. You preached about the importance of family, but you betrayed your own flesh and blood, I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. You stole your sister's inheritance, leaving her penniless and alone. And then you had the audacity to cut her out of your life when she needed you most. Belinda gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Hank looked stunned, his eyes darting between his mother and me. That's not true, Marjorie said weakly, but her voice lacked conviction. I shook my head. It is true, and you know it. You're not the paragon of virtue you pretend to be, Marjorie. You're a hypocrite and a liar. I could feel the eyes of the other partygoers on us, the whispers and murmurs growing louder with each revelation. But I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt truly empowered. Clara stepped forward. Her face twisted with anger. How dare you speak to Marjorie that way? She hissed. You have no right. No, Clara, I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. You don't get to lecture me about rights. You inserted yourself into my family, into my marriage, without a second thought for the damage you were causing. I turned back to Marjorie, my gaze unwavering. I'm done letting you control me, Marjorie. I'm done letting you poison my life with your lies and your manipulation. From now on, I'm taking back my power, and there's nothing you can do to stop me. With that, I turned on my heel and walked away, my head held high. I could hear Marjorie sputtering behind me, Belinda's shrill voice rising in indignation. But I didn't look back. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly free. I had spoken my truth, exposed the ugliness that had been lurking beneath the surface for so long. And in doing so, I had taken the first step towards reclaiming my life and my happiness. There would be more battles to come, more obstacles to overcome. But I knew now that I had the strength to face them head-on. I was no longer the meek, submissive wife who had let others dictate her fate. I was Elena, a woman who knew her own worth and refused to settle for anything less than she deserved. In the weeks following the confrontation at the block party, I threw myself into my new life with a renewed sense of purpose. I volunteered more at the community center, taking on additional responsibilities and spearheading new projects. It was there that I found a sense of belonging and fulfillment that had been missing from my life for so long. The other volunteers, many of them women my age who had faced their own challenges and triumphs, became a source of strength and support. One afternoon, as I was sorting through donated books for the center's library, I heard a familiar voice behind me. I turned to see Clara, Hank's girlfriend, standing in the doorway. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice wary. Clara stepped into the room, her eyes downcast. "I needed to talk to you, Elena, privately." I hesitated for a moment, then nodded, gesturing for her to sit down. Clara perched on the edge of a chair, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "But I need your help." I raised an eyebrow, surprised by her words. "My help? With what?" Clara took a deep breath, then spoke in a rush. "Marjorie and Belinda. They're making my life a living hell. Ever since the block party, they've been on a rampage, spreading lies about me and trying to turn Hank against me." I felt a flicker of sympathy for Clara, remembering all too well the pain of being on the receiving end of Marjorie and Belinda's cruelty. But I also couldn't help feeling a sense of vindication, knowing that they were finally getting a taste of their own medicine. "I'm sorry to hear that, Clara," I said carefully. "But what do you expect me to do about it?" Clara leaned forward, her eyes pleading. "I know you have dirt on them, Elena. The things you said at the party about Marjorie betraying her sister. I need you to tell me more. I need leverage to fight back. I sat back in my chair, considering her words. A part of me relished the idea of taking Marjorie and Belinda down a peg, of using their own secrets against them. But another part of me hesitated, knowing that revenge was a slippery slope. "I'll tell you what I know," I said finally. "But on one condition. You use this information to set boundaries and demand respect, not to stoop to their level." Clara nodded eagerly. "Of course, I promise. I just want to be treated fairly, to have a chance at a happy life with Hank." Over the next hour, I told Clara everything I knew about Marjorie's past, about the lies and betrayals that had torn her family apart. I could see the shock and anger on Clara's face as she listened, her hands clenching into fists. When I finished, Clara sat back in her chair, her eyes blazing with determination. "Thank you, Elena," she said softly. "I know this couldn't have been easy for you, dredging up the past like this, but I promise I won't let this information go to waste." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. It felt good to finally unburden myself of the secrets I had been carrying for so long, to know that they could be used for good. In the days that followed, I heard whispers of the changes taking place in Hank's family. Clara had confronted Marjorie and Belinda, armed with the truth about their past. She had demanded respect and set clear boundaries, refusing to be bullied or manipulated any longer. And to my surprise, it seemed to be working. Marjorie and Belinda's hold on the family was weakening, their power diminishing with each passing day. I knew that there would still be challenges ahead, that the scars of the past could never be fully erased. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of hope and possibility. I had taken back control of my life, and in doing so, I had given others the courage to do the same. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. As the months passed, I found myself thriving in my new life. The community center had become a second home to me, a place where I could make a real difference in the lives of others. I had started a support group for women who had gone through difficult life transitions, whether it was divorce, widowhood, or simply the challenges of aging. Every week, we would gather in the cozy meeting room, sharing our stories and offering each other support and encouragement. It was during one of these meetings that I met Sarah, a quiet woman in her late 50s who had recently lost her husband to cancer. She had been struggling to find purpose and meaning in her life, feeling lost and alone in the world. As I listened to her story, I felt a deep sense of connection and empathy. I knew all too well the pain of losing a loved one, of feeling like your entire world had been turned upside down. After the meeting, I approached Sarah, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I know it feels like everything is falling apart right now," I said softly, "but I promise you, it won't always be this way. You can always reclaim your life, no matter how hard it seems." Sarah looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. "How do you know?" she asked, her voice trembling. I smiled, thinking back on my own journey. "Because I've been where you are. I've felt that same pain, that same sense of hopelessness, but I found a way to keep going, to build a new life for myself. And you can too." Over the next few weeks, I took Sarah under my wing, introducing her to the other volunteers at the community center and helping her find ways to get involved. I watched as she slowly began to come out of her shell, her eyes sparkling with a newfound sense of purpose. One afternoon, as we were sorting through donations together, Sarah turned to me, a smile on her face. "I never thought I'd be able to laugh again," she said. "But being here, with all of you, it's given me a reason to keep going." I felt a surge of pride and happiness, knowing that I had played a small part in Sarah's healing. It was moments like these that made all the struggles and challenges of the past year worth it. As I continued to immerse myself in my community work, I found that my own wounds were slowly beginning to heal as well. The pain of my divorce and the betrayal of my former family would always be a part of me, but it no longer defined me. I had found a new sense of purpose and identity, one that was rooted in service and compassion. I had surrounded myself with people who lifted me up and supported me, rather than tearing me down. Even my relationship with Clara had begun to evolve. We would never be close friends, but we had found a way to coexist peacefully, united in our determination to set boundaries and demand respect. I knew that Hank was still struggling to come to terms with the changes in his life, but I no longer felt responsible for his happiness. I had learned the hard way that I couldn't control other people's actions or choices, but I could control my own. And so, as I looked out at the smiling faces of the women in my support group, I felt a deep sense of gratitude and contentment. I had come so far from the broken, defeated woman I had been just a year ago. I had reclaimed my life, my identity, and my sense of self-worth. I had found a way to turn my pain into purpose, to use my experiences to help others. And as I stood there, surrounded by the warmth and love of my new community, I knew that I had finally found my place in the world. I was no longer just surviving, but truly thriving.